You can sew this just in time for Christmas. In our very first public Wear What You Make sew along, we'll be making this version of a Christmas stocking from McCall's pattern M5778. My name is Afi Rule and I'll be your instructor. Make sure to check out the description section below for the link to the pattern along with some of our other resources. If at any point you are unfamiliar with any of the tasks that I'm carrying out, I can help you inside of our Wear What You Make sewing community. You can try it out for 3 months at 3pass.wearwhatyoumake.com. Let's get started.
Now I'd like to show you all of the materials that we're going to be using for this project. So you'll see over here that I have 3 pattern pieces, 5, 7, and 8. And I have the instructions back here for our project. All right, so here we've got our fabric. So I've got my tools back here. I have my pins with a pin holder. Mine is magnetic. I've got my tailor's chalk and a pin holder. My sewing shears, a seam ripper just in case I need to rip anything out and make a mistake, but also to take out any basting that we will be doing. And I've got some snippers, what I call snippers. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so this is the fabric for my stocking. I selected or purchased rather a canvas cotton. So as you can see here, I've got my pattern laid out, just like it says on the instructions. And actually, I want to show you the instructions in just a moment. So I have the digital version of the pattern package. If you have the traditional or paper copy, that is fine. You're still going to see the same instructions. It's going to tell you the same thing. It just might be in a different format. So the reason why I have the right side of the pattern facing up and the right sides of the fabric folded together is because that is what is indicated on the instructions. On your instructions, you're going to see a legend towards the front or the beginning of the instructions that are going to give you like a legend that says, like, for instance, this gray space is going to be like the right side of the fabric. And so if you see that gray space here, that means that you're folding your right sides together. And this white space on your pattern means that that is the right side of the pattern, and it's going to be facing up and flat on the wrong sides of your fabric. All right. Now, before we cut the stockings out, something that I want to point out is pay attention to the grain line arrows, right? You should see these on all of your pattern pieces. If you don't, assume that the grain line is going from top to bottom. So the reason why that's important is this fabric that I have has prints on it. If I were to cut it in the opposite direction, like this, with the grain line going from bottom to top, the print would be upside down. But you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the direction because it matters, especially with print fabric. But you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the grain line. All right, so now that we've got everything pinned, we're going to go through and cut. As I cut, I want you to realize that I do not have my hands in the way of the scissors. I have them parallel to wherever the fabric or the pattern is, inside of the fabric, because you're cutting outside of the pattern. So inside of the pattern is always a safe place to have your hands and fingers. All right. So the last thing that you have left here is that you want to cut your loop out. Again, for time's sake, if you already know how to cut your fabric, just cut that out. And then once you have everything, I want you to come back here, and then we'll talk about what to do with these pieces, and then we'll move on to the cuff. So before we unpin the pattern from the fabric, I want you to note that there is a transfer marking. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift the pin there so that it doesn't obstruct my ability to do that. And this little square right here, I'm going to transfer it onto the fabric, which basically means draw it onto the fabric on both sides. And since this is already the wrong side of the fabric, all I have to do is draw it there and then flip it over to the other side and draw it there as well. An easy way that I like to do it is I like to pen this into like the corner. And actually, I think I want to put it there, make it easier to flip this over, make it easier to flip the pattern. See there? So I flipped it, make it easy to do that, all right? So I'm going to draw my square. You can fill it in if you want to, it's up to you. It makes it easier to do that. But you just want to draw a square there and draw a square here. I was flipping it back over to see which direction I need to draw it into, but I need to draw it this way, all right? This is my square. Draw that on both sides, and then I don't see any other transferable markings. You would need to transfer these dots right here if you're going to add buttons to it. I'm not adding buttons to mine, so I'm not going to draw these on. I'm just going to transfer this, okay? And when you transfer your markings, make sure that you use a color that is in contrast to the fabric. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpin the pattern from the fabric, and then I'm going to set both the pattern piece and the garment pieces aside so that we can move on to the cuff. All right. So I'm just going to fold those together very neatly and place those to the side. Okay, so this is the last part of the stocking, which is the lining. We're going to cut this the same exact way that we did the outer shell. So now I'm not going to cut this over again. So again, you're going to pin the pattern to your fabric, which should be folded together with right sides together. You're going to cut this out, and then you're going to transfer your marking here, same way that we did with the outer shell. Once you've done that, just simply take your garment pieces, set them aside, and then we will move on to the cuff. Okay, guys, so as you can see here, we have our cuff pattern piece already pinned to the fabric. The fabric is wrong sides out, and the pattern piece is right side up, okay? So as you can see here, you can't see a grain line direction, okay? But what I'm gauging this by is the number 7 is here up on the top. And as you know, we read from top to bottom. So this is the top of the pattern piece. This is the bottom. So I'm going to assume that the direction is going this way. So because this is a napped fabric, and again, I bought all of my fabric from Hobby Lobby in person, which is what I recommend, especially for beginners, or if you're working on something that you normally don't work on, like I am. Because this is a nap fabric, we need to know which direction the nap is going. My nap is running in this direction. So as I was explaining before, I'm going to assume that the direction of the fabric is supposed to run this way because it's not written anywhere on the pattern piece, okay? So this is why I have this placed this way. I already got it pinned down. Now all we have to do is cut our cuff piece out. And so now we're going to take our pins out. I have my pin holder in another room. I was working on some of these. We're just going to take these out, set them aside. We're unpinning the pattern piece from the fabric. And what I'm going to do is pin it here because we need to transfer some markings. And then we are done. Now it is time to actually start sewing our stocking together. So something that I do before I actually literally start stitching my garment pieces together is I will lay them out on my table and I will take a look at them and make sure that all the markings are transferred, make sure I'm not missing anything. And on this particular project, you're going to leave an opening in the lining of the stocking only. And you can make it just as big as like your hand. You just need to make sure that you can kind of fit your hand through it. What I'm going to do and what I recommend that you do as well is to just draw on here where you want your stitching to stop. Make like a little line or a dot, doesn't matter. And then where you want it to resume, I'm going to mark mine right about here. And once we actually go through again, you will see why we did this way. Now, something that I'm going to do, you don't have to do this, but it does give your garment a much nicer finish on the inside. I'm going to serge the edges of each individual piece separately because these are woven fabrics. They unravel. And because this is a nap fabric, as you can see, some of the fabric is kind of like shedding off. That's normal for that type of fabric. And I'm also going to do the same thing with my loop, okay? So if you don't have a serger, that is perfectly fine. You can do this with an overcast stitch on your sewing machine, all right? And I'm going to show you what the pieces look like after I've done them all individually, all right? All right, so this is what all my pattern pieces look like now that I've gone through and I have finished off the edges, and I did that again for each individual piece. And now we are going to go ahead and start stitching everything together. A very important part of stitching your fabric pieces together is pinning them together before you do this, okay? So what we're doing right now is we're just pinning our pieces together as accurately. I don't like saying perfectly. It's too much pressure. But you do want your pieces to line up with each other. You don't want them mismatched like this, okay? You see how, you don't want them like that. You want them to overlay as accurately as possible, and you just want to pin the two pieces together. Make sure you don't stick your hands. All right, outer shell is complete. Now let's move on to our lining, which is this right here. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start where the dots are, okay? I'm start where the dots are. I'm gonna start pinning there. And I'm going to put my pin on the bottom of the bottom here, bottom of the bottom dot, and then the top of the top dot. That's going to give me some wiggle room to, if I stitch a little bit past that, that's fine. But this is going to notify me of I need to leave this open. Okay, this is going to be wider than the rest of my pins, plus the dots are going to be my clue that I do not need to stitch there. So now we're just going to do the same thing on the lining, minus this part right here that we did on the shell. All right, so that is our outer shell and our lining. Now let's talk about how we're going to pin together our loop. This is the right side of the fabric. This is the wrong side. So we want to fold this together like this, wrong sides together, right side of the fabric. So we want to fold the fabric in on itself like this, and then again like that, okay? And we're gonna start pinning right there, okay? Now we have one more piece, which is our cuff. And our cuff is going to be stitched together along this side where the dots are. We're going to stitch from dot to dot. Well, edge to edge, but the dots are clues as to where we are going to be stitching. So we're going to pin this together, just like we did with our stockings. All right, everything's pinned together. Now we are going to go and stitch. Okay, guys, we're going to start with our straight stitch on our cuff, okay? So I have my straight stitch at factory settings, actually, which is 3.5 width and 2.5 length, okay? If you're not familiar with what your straight stitch is, just make sure that you take a look at your manual that came with your sewing machine. I am using my foot here as the guide for my seam allowance. So I've already got the presser foot down. You just place it down, and I'm going to do 1 or 2 stitches, maybe 3, and then do a back stitch. Okay. And make sure that you are not stitching over your pins. You can break your sewing needles and possibly damage your sewing machine. All right. So here we go. Back stitch. And now we're just going to continue on with a straight stitch, making sure that our fabric is lined up with the edge of our sewing machine. Or you can use whatever guide you want over here that is built into your sewing machine as your seam allowance. All right, so that's the end of our stitch here. And I did a back stitch, but I'm going to do that again. I do that whenever I come to the end because it just helps with reinforcement and it helps make the garment stronger. And so that is the end. I am going to cut my thread here with my scissors. So that's it for Z cuff. And now we're going to move on to the stocking. All right, so because this is the outer shell of our stocking, I'm just going to start from one of the tops. It doesn't really matter. It's flat, so it'll just bring us all the way to the other end once we're finished going all the way around the end of the stocking. I'm going to clip these stray pieces of thread, and I'm going to start here. So same as before, I'm going to lower my foot. I'm going to make sure that the edge of my fabric is lined up with the edge of my foot. I'm going to do a couple of stitches in and then do a back stitch all the way to the edge of the top. And here we go. When you're going around curves, go at a slower pace. It'll help you to make sure that you are keeping the shape of the curve true to form. All right, and now we are on to our beloved stocking lining. This is the top, and so this is one of the sides. And this is the side where we are going to leave an opening, all right? So let's keep the dots up so that we can see them, shall we? So we're going to start on this side, which is opposite of the side that has the dots on it. So I'm just cutting off excess threads here, removing any excess threads from my sewing space. And again, lining my fabric up to the edge of my sewing foot. That's my seam allowance. You can use any seam allowance that you want here that is built into the plate of your sewing machine. I am going to do a couple of forward stitches using my straight stitch. If you are not familiar with that, make sure that you refer to your user's manual for your sewing machine. Do a couple of stitches in, the back stitch, and then we're going to keep rolling. Okay, so now we've come back around to we've come around rather to the first dot in what is going to be our opening. This is the second one. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch through right until about right where the top of the dot is, okay? I'm going to maintain my seam allowance reference point and just stitch through, make sure that I don't stitch over the needle. And then I'm going to do a couple of back stitches, forward and back stitches. I'm going to do that to reinforce so that when we stick our hand through, that when we move the fabric back through the opening here, it doesn't rip. The stitching doesn't rip. Okay, so we're going to stop here because remember, we're going to leave this open. So I'm going to remove this, clip the excess thread. And now I'm going to leave all of this open, and then I'm going to pick back up at the next dot, which is going to go all the way through to the end of our stocking lining, okay? Now we've come to the end. We are going to remove our cloth from the underneath the foot. We're going to snip our excess thread because remember, we don't want that showing through anywhere when we stitch it together. And now we are going to stitch our very last piece of the puzzle, which is our loop, okay? We're going to top stitch our loop. See where this is the opening. This is where we need to stitch it together. And a top stitch, or an edge stitch rather, is going to go as close to the edge as possible without going over the cloth. All right, so I'm going to pull this away, stitch our excess. That's the last piece that we need to work on. So now what we're going to do is put all of the pieces together. First things first, we're going to take the stocking shell or outer portion and we're going to flip it inside out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my finger and run it along the seam from the inside. And what this is going to do is it's going to push out any fabric they may be like kind of clumped in, sort of like. and make sure that it is pushed out to the edge, because what we're going to do is we are going to press this so that it stays. Okay, you're going to press alongside the edges, like once they are like this. Okay, once we go through and we make sure that everything is kind of popped out, we are going to again press. Okay, I'm just making sure that it is fully turned outward near the edge, because we want a nice shape to our stocking. So I think that that's good. What we're going to do now is we're going to press this, okay? We're going to press this along the outer edge. We're going to press it right along there. So we're going to do that and then come back. All right, so here is our stocking all pressed. And I actually pressed, just the rest of it to make it nice and pressed out. You don't have to do that, but you can. If you didn't, you can just pause right here and do that and then resume. Now we're going to start pinning everything together so that we can stitch everything together. All right, so now we're going to take our cuff. So what we're going to do is flip this right sides together, stitched end to stitched end, okay? So the easiest way to do that is to take these two ends. This is the stitch edges or stitched ends. Put them together like this, and then flip your cuff right side out with wrong sides together, okay? Then you can just come together here and smooth everything together the way that you want it. But you want to make sure that your cuff is flipped over like this with the wrong sides together. And then I'm going to show you how to pin it to your stocking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my stocking cuff, making sure that the edges are together like they were, kind of nice and lined up. And then I'm going to make sure where the seam is, I'm going to make sure that is placed to the back of my stocking, okay? And it's going to go with the stitched or the raw or open edges up, okay? So we're going to slide this over our stocking like this, okay? And again, you want to make sure that the seam here for your stocking is lined up with the seam on your cuff, all right? So another thing that we want to make sure that we do is we want to make sure that the seam up here is directly lined up with the seam on the stocking. Let me zoom that in so you can see it. So the seam on our cuff is lined up with the seam on the stocking. I'm going to do that right here. And then we're going to pin it just like that below the stitches, okay? And we want to make sure that all thicknesses are as lined up as we can possibly make them. So I have 3 layers of fabric. I want to make sure that all 3 are as lined up like this. I don't want anyone sticking up or down. I want them to be as lined up as possible, especially right here, all right? So then another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch it out just a little bit to make sure that I don't have any gapping anywhere. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take our loop and pin it to our stocking. So I'm going to show you what I do with my loop. You can do it this way if you want, but I'm going to do mine with, kind of crossed over like this. Give my loop a little look like this. And we're going to pin this to the back where the cuff is. On the outside of the cuff. Do not pin it to the inside, pin it to the outside, okay? All right. So it is pinned, it is tacked on there. And when you stitch over, just make sure, I'm going to show you how to make sure that this stays in place, all right? So we're going to stitch or baste all of these together with our sewing machine. I'm going to show you how I do that. All right, so here we've got our cuff and we're about to stitch all our thicknesses together. I'm going to start about right here and then sew over the part where the loop is stitched into the rest of the opening, okay? All right, so lifting our foot, and maneuvering can be a little harder sometimes with thicker fabrics, okay? So what I'm going to do, I told you that I was going to baste with my sewing machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my straight stitch. For me, that is a 0 because I have a digitized single stylist. If you are not sure what your straight stitch is, refer to your user's manual, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my stitch width to 4.0 and my length to 4.0. That is similar to a basting stitch, but you can also do a 5.0 with like a 5.0. That is very similar to hand basting. So we have everything underneath. And again, I am going to use the edge of my foot as my seam allowance guide. I'm going to line the edge of my sewing foot with the edge of my fabric, and that is going to be where I am stitching. We're going to go ahead and start. All right, so we've gotten as close as we can. I'm going to put my needle down with my manual knob on the side of my machine, lift my sewing foot up, inch all of the fabric thicknesses a little bit towards underneath the foot, place the foot back down, and as you can see, the fabric here is now underneath the foot in the front. So we're going to stitch very slowly, and then I'm going to make sure here actually that my everything here is good to go, that nothing is slipping down. I like to make sure that my bottom layer isn't slipping down, all right? So I'm going to go forward. And if you need to do that again, that's fine. Inch forward, and you can gently kind of press things forward and pull back here gently. Needle down, inch forward underneath the foot with the fabric. Needle down, inch up underneath the fabric. Gently pull. Okay, and I have another needle under here, so I want to make sure that I don't stitch over that. Always keep an eye on your needles. All right, and you can use your manual knob too to go through. All right, you don't always have to use your presser foot. I'm going to use my manual knob right now and gently pull back here to give it some guidance, okay? All right, so now I've come to the point where I can see my needle is about to go underneath. I'm going to lift that up, lift my presser foot up, take it out, and then I'm going to keep going. Put my presser foot back down. So I just back stitched because this is the end of our road with stitching all of this together. I'm going to take these pins out because it is stitched over, and I'm going to remove this from underneath the foot, clip off any excess thread, and now we're going to talk about how to sew on the lining. So now what we're going to do is we are going to take our lining, and we can leave it with the right sides turned in. As you can see, all the stitching here and the raw edges here, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to place the outer shell inside of this stocking lining because we want the right sides together. We want the right side of the stocking shell touching the right side of the stocking lining, okay? So we're just going to insert the shell into the lining just like this. All right, so similar to the way that we did the shell, we just want to make sure that we have what we need lined up. Not perfect, just accurate. And again, you want to make sure that you want to try to line up, try to line up the seams. Do the seams, it's kind of hard to see here, but you can see it there. And make sure to try to line the seam up in the back, all right? All right, so we have everything pinned together, and we're going to stitch through all of the thicknesses just like we did before, and then we're almost finished. All right, so here we are stitching our final thicknesses together at the opening of our stockings. We want to slide our fabric underneath the foot. You can lift the foot up if that helps you. You can pick any starting point that you like. I'm going to put mine right here. So foot is down. I'm still going to use 4.0 by 4.0 because even though that can be used as a basting stitch, I feel like longer and wider stitches also work well for heavier duty fabrics or thicker fabrics that are pinned together when you don't have like a heavy duty machine or a machine that is designed to do thicker fabrics, which mine is not. So we're going to start by doing a couple of front stitches, back stitch, and then we're going to keep going. And that concludes stitching everything together for the opening of our stocking. All right, so this is what your Christmas stocking should look like so far. So what we're going to do is we are going to take our Christmas stocking where the opening is, okay? It's our opening that we left open. You should have an opening. If you don't, all you have to do is just seam rip out an opening and you should be fine. So we're going to take the inside out. We're going to flip it inside out just like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to completely flip the stocking part inside out, but do not put it inside of the stocking yet. Okay, you want to leave it just like this. And there's a reason why, and I'm going to show you in just a moment. So this is our opening, right? If you want to, you can leave it open, but it might look unfinished to the recipient. So what I do with these, I like to stitch them closed with a top stitch with a straight stitch. Okay. So I like to use my pins as a starting and finishing point. And then I'll put one in the middle to make sure that the raw edges or the edges don't wiggle away on me. Okay. So then what we'll do is we will top stitch this off camera. You can do that as well. Then we'll come back here and we will finish our Christmas stocking. We're almost done, guys. Woo woo! All right, guys, I'm super excited. This is what your stocking should look like thus far. If it does not, come on inside of the Wear What You Make community and talk to me, okay? But if it does, let's go ahead and finish up. We've got our top stitch right here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to finish this puppy, okay? We're going to put our stocking lining inside of the stocking. I'm going to push it down in there real good. And voila, we've got our stocking.
All right, guys, I want to know how your stockings came out. Make sure to post them and then tag me on Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram, you can tag me at Wear What You Make Official. And on Facebook, you can tag me at Wear What You Make. Inside the Wear What You Make community, you can get this sew-alongs guide. The guide has additional tips to help you complete your stockings. In addition to the guide, you'll also get a tutorial that has tips on how to customize your stocking. That's all for now. We'll talk soon. Bye.